you know.
All right.
Shout out to them for hooking us up with their Zoom login information.
That's good. Allah bless them.
So I think we'll be 4 minutes. We can get started.
Anything I should know?
This conversation is unscripted, so we technically cannot tell you much.
Right. Okay.
But,
Throw a surprise question at me and stuff. That's messed up, dude.
I mean, but that's the whole thing. I mean, isn't that what you do? I mean,
Yeah, I've been doing it all week, man. It's insane.
is it? Wait, is this what you've been doing? Like you've just been?
Yeah, I had like some session in Canada and then some session in the UK, and then because like everyone just wants to jump online now. So yeah.
Yes.
So it's
Right before the whole quarantine thing started, you were in New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
How was that?
It was pretty intense, man. I mean, we went to like 20 different cities in like 8 days or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The thing is, I mean, the distances were far, like the drives, 4 to 6 hours, 8 hours, stuff like that.
Oh, man. Any time for sightseeing?
Yeah, at the end. So I took a couple of days, like maybe 4 or 5 days at the end, and just kind of went to go see some of New Zealand. Because last time I didn't. So last time I was there, I was just at the 2 masjids where the shooting happened. We didn't really do anything else. This time I actually got to see New Zealand, and it is much. I mean, it's gorgeous, man.
So Muslim and I were trying to get Sonny Bill Williams to jump onto one of these episodes. Do you have any contacts with him?
Oh man, good luck. Even people that had contacts with him in the past, I mean, they're even having some trouble. So.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. So I think he's in Canada now, if I'm not mistaken.
Is he really?
I think so. I think he's playing for maybe one of the teams there, something like that. So yeah. So I don't know. So I'm not even sure if he's really in New Zealand or went back to New Zealand after this whole COVID-19 thing started.
We'll keep trying Twitter and Instagram, see what happens.
Yeah, try it. I mean, give it a shot. There's he's not doing much, so.
One of his teammates also converted to Islam right after what happened in Christchurch.
Mm-hmm. Dude, we had a lot of conversions after that, man. I mean, it was pretty insane. And not just in Christchurch. There was, just people all over the world that all of a sudden Islam came to be a focus. And so it was just interesting to see how that played out,
Question, if this, I'm hoping we got a pretty good response when we were marketing this and sharing this with people.
Yeah.
If this goes well, would you be down to come back for a second episode sometime later with your friend Hamza?
With Hamza Zortzis?
Yeah, because I've seen you two interact, but I've never seen you two like live on a panel together or anything like that.
So, Hamza has taken a leave for some time. So he's not going to be around for, I want to say, another 6 months. So he's focusing on his dissertation. So basically, it's just total radio silence from him. So yeah, so if you want to schedule something, 2021, sure.
I mean, that's cool.
No, but I mean, the thing is, he's and it's good that he's kind of focusing because he's dealing, and we probably want to get into this later, but he's dealing with artificial intelligence and consciousness.
Yes.
That's the next new fitna that's coming out after the whole evolution thing. So
I'm gonna make a note of that. You might have to talk about that because I remember you mentioned that before. So hopefully we have time in this, so maybe you can
just
talk about that also.
I want to tell you about it.
No, well, you're here now, okay? So you scared me with this 2021, so now we're gonna use you as much as we can right now. Inshallah. Okay, so it's 5 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. To all those who are joining, welcome. This is Untold Stories of Islam in America. Myself and Firaz will be hosting with a different guest every week. Firaz, you got anything to say?
No, this is just completely unscripted conversations that we have with different guests that jump on every single week. The sisters are also putting something together, which will be every Sunday, same timing.
Yeah, so it's a parallel series, and the next 4 weeks we have a variety of topics and speakers that Firaz and I have been very interested in delivering that message to the masses of the Muslim youth, like Islam in prison, taking Islam to the streets, Islam in hip hop, discussions with some imams that don't come from your typical imam backgrounds. But we decided that before we get into any of that, we have to sit down and have a difficult conversations we're afraid to have. So this deals with a lot of those issues that sometimes may seem controversial or taboo, and our youth have these questions, don't know where to go. So where do they go? They go to Imam Fahad Tasleem. So with that, I introduce Sheikh Fahad Tasleem. He has a big social media presence. If you search him on YouTube, you see just a variety of information. Qualified speaker on a bunch of things, but I know that at the root of everything, his passion is dawah. And also, real quick, we also have another brother here with us. Unmute him. Abdullah Najjar from Houston. Abdullah, how are you?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm good, alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Perfect timing. So with that, we'll turn it over to our brother Fahad Tasleem. First and foremost, how have you been holding up during this whole COVID situation? What have you been doing to stay productive, and any advice for us as we begin?
Sure. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So just for starters, I came into the situation, we were speaking earlier before we went live, was that I was actually in New Zealand. And so when I came back, we were just thrust into quarantine, right? So it was interesting because when I was in New Zealand, it wasn't on a state of lockdown like it is now, right? So everyone in the States was kind of texting us and, on social media, like it's all on lockdown, you can't get toilet paper. And toilet paper was, abundant over there. So I was, I was just like, all right, I can't be that bad, right? And so we got here, we came through. I did notice something which I thought was interesting, was that when I got to New Zealand, which was maybe end of February, even at that point, like immigration there, like took you through a whole series of questions. Have you visited China? Have you been to Wuhan? Have you been in contact with anyone from China? And this was just a person. It wasn't because I was Muslim, like we're typically used to, but just everyone was being asked all those questions. Similarly, on the way out from New Zealand, whole litany of questions, right? Like, did you go to any part of China? Have you had any interaction with someone from Australia, and so on? Because at that time, I think Tom Hanks had recently gotten it, and so Australia was on the map. But what was crazy was when I got back to the States, immigration didn't ask me anything, right? Like literally I get in and the guy's like, oh, so you went to New Zealand? I'm like, yeah. He's like, for what? I'm like, well, a little work, little play. He's like, all right, welcome home. Boom. That was it. I was like, what a huge difference. Like they were doing nothing at the time, And then, yeah, I'm sure now if you're going to be traveling, you'll probably get the questions. Yeah. But that was the first thing that I noticed, was that there's a real big difference in, just immigration from the two things. Anyhow, how I've been handling it. I mean, look, man, I'm kind of naturally introverted. So for me, this is like a vacation, man. It's great. I got me, I got my books and all of that. Yeah, the kids are at home. That's a bit annoying, but So I've been good. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
But at the same time, I understand, everyone does have different personality types. A lot of us like social. And so I'm making dua for y'all, man.
So what were you in New Zealand for?
So if you remember, last year there was a shooting in New Zealand. Well, there's two masjids. They were, someone went in and shot some of the people praying Jummah at the two masjids. So there was a lot of outpouring of support from the government, from the people. And I was there last year as well after the incident happened. So this year they were supposed to do a commemoration of that, where the country was supposed to get together. Unfortunately, by the time our tour ended, the date of the commemoration was canceled, just because there was just too many people to be gathered in one spot. But what resulted was that, we were still able to do the tour because the tour was before the date of the commemoration. So it was like 8 days, 20 different cities, maybe 15 cities, 15, 20 cities all across New Zealand. And we were doing, IERA has put out an exhibition on Islamic spirituality. And we released a new book as well by Dr. Uthman Latif talking about basically being human, and how does Islam naturally inculcate compassion within the human being, right? So we did that book launch in, I think that was in Christchurch at the end of the tour as well. So it was good. We had some really great conversations, presented to a lot of, high-ranking members of government and regular people. And so it was a good experience. But it was crazy because you would go city to city and, you'd have like 4-hour drives, 6-hour drives, but they're not like they are in Texas, right? Like a 4-hour drive to, Dallas, or maybe Musab does it in 2.5, whatever. So a drive like that is just straight, right? Just flat road.
Yeah.
But in New Zealand, it was just windy the entire time. So you'd get to a city and be completely drained, and then boom, it's like an hour later you've got to present. So
Wow,
it was draining.
So for those people who aren't in the know, what is IERA?
So IERA is it's a UK-based charity. It stands for the Islamic Research and Education Academy.
Islamic Education and Research.
Yeah, sorry. Islamic Education.
It's okay. I'm a big fan, so.
Yeah, there you go. So alhamdulillah. And I say it's based in the UK, but we have presence all over the world, and our primary focus is basically da'wah to non-Muslims. And so we do that on various levels. So on the street level, the ground level, we have da'wah training in that area. We reach out to people in the streets, all the way up to within academia as well. So a lot of our guys are basically pursuing academic credentials to be able to deal with some of the pressing questions that are asked by non-Muslims, and some of those questions that cause doubts for Muslims as well.
So it's interesting that you answered that way, because that leads us right to our first question. Actually, before we even get to the first question, something that I think a more important question that I wanted to ask you, Brother Fahad, was if you look online, there's plenty of, well, first of all, our resource for information and education today is purely online. Books are a thing of the past, unfortunately. And there's plenty of reliable information that we can find. I listen to Mufti Menk every morning without fail. But there's probably 2 to 3 times as much anti-Islamic propaganda, negative and false information. Naturally, our Muslim youth have questions which can seem very disrespectful, blasphemous at times. And in many times, they're afraid to go to imams, or when they do go to imams. How important is it that people like yourself, but not just yourself, parents, Islamic leaders, elders, how important is it that we receive these questions like seriously and sincerely?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I would say it's extremely important. I mean, one of the programs that we did at IERA is every year we host a group of mashayikh and imams that come to the office in the UK, and we take them through our like advanced atheism, advanced Christianity training. And the reason we do that is because they might have let's say they may have studied Aqidah on an advanced level, but they may not have the tools to be able to articulate that in a way that's palatable to like the masses, right? So a young person that comes and asks a question, I mean, maybe you could come in and talk to him about, some, nuanced area of theology, but that's not really answering his core question. So one of the things we did is we try to train a lot of the imams and mashayikh every year by bringing them out there. And we did this at Medina University as well. We flew out there and we trained some of the students out there, only because there is, from the perspective of like imams, mashayikh and things like that, there's the knowledge that comes from the books and the classroom, but then there's the questions that you have on the ground, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the struggles that imams, mashayikh, and parents have is how do you convert one set of information that's been taught and learned in a certain format to a format that's understandable in the modern context, right? So one of the things we say is that, look, we're not bringing in new arguments. We're actually looking at the classical scholar, like, Imam al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, etc. And we're basically just contemporizing them and making it so it's clear to someone that perhaps doesn't have access to those texts,
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for parents to go through that. And a lot of the classes that we teach in the US related to atheism, I usually encourage more parents to take it, because it's a dawah training course for advanced atheism, but the true recipient usually is, Muslim youth, right? And so if the parents know about it, they can teach their youth, and then hopefully, our idea is that the youth will when they get to college, they can start proactively calling people to Islam.
Well, from an information, sorry for us. I just want to clarify the question a little bit more. You answered from an information perspective, but also what we've noticed is, I can give you an example. One of my childhood friends, he unfortunately started listening to Richard Dawkins, like binging this guy, and so he had some questions that when he went to his traditional Muslim father who comes from, he said when he asked his dad this question that was kind of disrespectful about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said his father slapped him so hard he heard ringing in his ears.
Yikes.
And that drove him like that. Figuratively, when his father slapped him, it propelled him towards atheism even more. So what about that? How can we handle that?
I mean, look, man, the thing is, we have to understand that, we're living in a context where there's going to be a lot of, if you want to call them attacks on Islam, and you have to be able to be patient in the midst of all that, right? So you're talking about, your child coming home. I think the issue with your child, your son or your daughter coming home with a question like that is that perhaps it's just not expected, because, you maybe did all the right things. He's a hafidh or she's a hafidha of the Quran. And so now they're coming and they're saying like, hey, what's wrong with homosexuality or whatever it might be, right? Whatever the deal is, why, is gender really fluid? I think it is. And, parents start flipping out like, what? How could you, possibly, there it goes, right?
Yeah.
But it's really important that we understand the context that we're in and we're able to deal with some of those questions. So I'll just give you an example. So with me and my own kids, there's a lot of things. So I'm a big Marvel fan, right? And
sorry to hear about that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with Marvel, man. Come on.
Ramadan's coming, make tova. Anyway, so my kids are into it too, but what you'll notice is that there's certain things that will come up with Marvel superheroes, things like that. Like they have like a new homosexual hero, right? And it's something that's completely normal. Kind of taking that on head on, I think, is really important, right? And not just letting it kind of fluster a person is important, because your kids are going to be exposed to it, right?
Wait, so what's wrong with the homosexual?
What's wrong with the homosexual hero? Well, nothing, as long as they do their own thing and they reserve for themselves. But if you ask like, does Islam condone homosexuality? That's a different question, right? That gets into questions about morality. Where do you get morality in this? Kind of those more core issues, right? Which we can talk about in a little bit. But on my point in coming to the crux of your question, it's important for parents to be really patient, right, with their kids, because your kids are going to come up with some crazy questions that are really going to test your patience, right? And if you want to look at it from a dawah perspective, I mean, how many people we talk about, let's say a child asking something disrespectful about the Prophet ﷺ, but how many people disrespected the Prophet ﷺ himself to his face, right? And what you'll find is that the Prophet ﷺ was never angered when someone attacked his person. Yeah, if they attacked the deen, that's different. That would anger him, but to his person, because he understood that, look, these things that are coming to this person are not coming, from, let's say, a genuine hatred, right, per se. A lot of it has to do with coming from a general state of ignorance, right, or a jahiliyyah, which is twofold, right? There's ignorance, and then there's, a lack of like patience as well, which is a separate issue. But so having that understanding and having that patience with your kids is important, man. I mean, slapping your kid for something like that, that's rough, man. I mean, I feel for them,
Yeah, I think it was what you said, unexpected. Faraz, you were saying?
Yeah, and I think it's one of the issues that we see for first generation and even some second generation Muslim Americans. And the problem is that, for our parents, back home, they were taught Islam and they never really questioned it. It was kind of just said, okay, you believe this and that's that. Right. And so when they came over here, they tried replicating that same formula for us over here, and it didn't work, especially with the advent of internet, social media, people allowing you to have access to information much easier.
Yeah.
And so with that, one of the questions that I remember one of my friends asked, and hopefully maybe you can answer this, was, and this also kind of speaks to the topic where you said that when the people attacked the Prophet's character, he never responded, but if they attacked the deen, then he would respond. I had a friend who once asked me that if he is such a good person, right? So he goes out and he does everything that's right. You know,
Right.
he treats people with respect. He gives to charities whenever he needs. What's the point of him being a Muslim? Why does he have to pray 5 times a day if he's a genuinely good person? Is he going to go to hell because of that?
Right, right. No, it's a good question. You know, I mean, from one perspective, you know, and one of the interesting things about, you know, if you were to tell me like all of these questions in a nutshell, what is the problem in a nutshell, right? Like if I said, okay, if you were to ask me, give me one answer, why do questions like this come up? I think a lot of it has to do with the worldview that you're in, right? And one of the things that we're always trying to understand, and we're trying to basically teach people, is to understand the worldview that the other person is in, right? So someone coming with this question is coming with a certain worldview, right? And one of the this worldview has a certain assumption. So one assumption is, well, good people. All right. The assumption is, I know what good is, right? That's the core assumption, right?
Yeah.
So I recognize good, and therefore good is what I recognize or what society recognizes, right? Now there's a kind of a more nuanced point where we talk about something known as objective morality, right? Are there certain things that are objectively moral, objectively immoral? For example, and this is the one we use a lot, we say, look, is something like rape, is that objectively immoral? Like let's say, what I mean by objective versus subjective. So if the entire world came together and they agreed that rape is okay, it's moral, would you say it's okay, or would you say it's not okay, right? If you're going to say it's not okay, even though the entire world said it's okay, what you're saying is that is objectively moral. It's not subject to the society around you, right? Okay, if that's the case, what is the moral anchor then? What makes that? How do you prove something to be objectively moral, objectively immoral, if you take God out of the picture? Because once you say that morality is based upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically giving us, that morality, then you have a firm anchor. Once you take that anchor away, what is the anchor by which you say that this is correct or this is wrong, this is good or this is bad? So when you're going to judge a situation, you really have to say, where does Allah fit into the entire picture? If you take Allah out, then you need an alternative. Is the alternative society? Because if that's the case, society at a certain point, let's say if you were brought up in a certain point of history in Germany, you would think it'd be completely moral to slaughter Jews because your society has determined that. And if you say that there are morals that are objectively true, right, that they're not based upon the flaying or the ups and downs of society, you have to provide a moral anchor. If that moral anchor is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we come back to the question, what do we mean by good people? If being a good person has rejected Allah from the very start, right? Is that truly good? And does that really have anything to do with what we're talking about? Of course it does, right? So anyways, that's kind of a...
But I'm with you, but if I was on the other side, I would answer that by saying, well, look, there's certain things that we as human beings, it's naturally in our DNA, right?
Sure.
It's like treating others with respect, being merciful to other people. There were Germans who were living in Nazi Germany who didn't think what the Nazis were doing was right. So if they were just good to the people around them and they were just naturally, merciful to everyone, do they go to hell if they don't accept Islam?
But again, it goes back to, is the quality of what you define as good specifically, right? Is it devoid of, having a moral anchor in the first place? Okay, now let me take a step back. So when you say good, like, okay, mercy, let's say they're merciful to people around them. That's a good quality, okay?
Yeah.
Now you have people in that very society that said, okay, well, being merciful to Jews is not a good quality. Imagine they come to you and say, okay, well, prove to us that it's a good quality. You say it's good, but we actually agree that it's not. So without putting Allah in the picture, how are you going to prove that? Right? If today someone comes to you and says, look, man, we think, let's say, treating Muslims like, garbage is okay, right? We don't have to be merciful to them, right? Prove to me that it's not. Well, it's part of your human construct. Okay, but you say that. There's a lot of humans out there that think it's not, right? I mean, there's a lot of white nationalists that would totally disagree with you.
Yeah.
How do you prove it? How do you take one position over the other, right? if your moral anchor is not something that transcends the human being, right? If it's limited to the human being, you have to actually tell us, well, what is it then? Because if that's the case, you can say whatever you want about anything, right? When someone comes and says, well, you have all of these, that Muslims do X, Y, and Z, and that's wrong. Well, what's the basis for that, right? Having 4 wives, right, is morally, reprehensible. Okay, based on what? Is that your subjective opinion, or is that objective? And it's objective. What's your anchor, right? I mean, you can say it's society, but then society isn't objective, right? I mean, there's other options as well. You can say it's evolution, but evolution has its issues as well as being something that's, what exactly in evolution are we saying that's objective? You can't, because of the whole concept of evolution has to do with change. You're subject to the change. So therefore, that's not objective either. So if you're going to take an objective source out of the picture, how do you say something is good versus bad, right? Being merciful to people. And by the way, I'm not saying that there aren't certain qualities that we agree is good as human beings, right? That we understand those things. But when you put them to the test and you actually, boil it down and say, okay, well, is this truly good? How are you going to substantiate that, right? Without a source that is not human, that's outside of the realm of limited human subjectivity, right? Because then it just comes down to opinion.
So then on the flip side of the argument, right, someone could easily say that, you're viewing morality through the subjective lens of Islam, right? And so,
no, I mean, I'm saying forget Islam for a minute. I'm saying, what are you viewing morality through? If you're saying it's subjective, okay, first of all, do we agree that there are certain morals that are objectively true? Like, do we say that rape is wrong?
Yeah.
Okay. So now if I ask you, okay, can you prove it to me? Like, what makes it wrong? If the entire society came together and said it's okay, would you agree with that?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't. Why? Based on what?
Well, then, so for me
don't try, man. This guy's really good.
Well, I can't take my religion out of the equation when I'm answering that question.
Just try, man. Pretend you're an atheist for 5 minutes,
Carl.
No difference to anyone named Carl. Anyways.
Oh man. You're going against somebody's will. You're doing you're causing harm onto somebody. Even if people agree that it isn't harm, you're still harming someone.
So what?
So to hurt somebody is wrong.
Another person is hurt by you. You wouldn't want them to do that to you.
So the golden rule, huh?
Golden rule. Okay, what makes the golden rule true? Is it objectively true?
It's just because we agreed it. People just think it sounds good. A lot, but there was a time where people thought other things sounded good.
This goes back to what's known as the harm principle, right? Okay, so now you're opening up the door for a lot of philosophical issues. For instance, can, let's say, the government dictate something within law where it says that you're not allowed to harm yourself, right? So for instance, and this is what's known as libertarian philosophy, right? So basically, according to libertarians, you cannot have laws for seatbelts, for instance, because that's taking away human agency. You should be determining what you are, you're capable of, and therefore, you cannot say harming yourself would be bad, right? So what I'm trying to say with this is that if you're even going to say that it's just based on harming another human being, what makes that wrong? Why is that wrong? If 2 human beings get together and agree that, okay, well, one human will kill another and they're okay with that, is that perfectly moral? Is that okay?
A showdown.
What's that?
Oh, it's circumstantial,
A showdown.
right? Let's say the 3 of them are on a deserted island, right? And they have to decide which one they're gonna eat.
Okay.
Different example. He's talking about a showdown.
Okay. Question. Bro Fahad, do you mind if we take 10 steps back?
Sure.
And go back to a basic question.
Sure.
Because I like where this is going, but so going back to a very basic question, because I feel like this is something we need to kind of address. This was actually comes from one of Khalid Yassin's legendary lectures, The Purpose of Life, where he opens by saying that, there's certain things that all of mankind has unanimous consensus. Why do you eat? You eat for nutrition. Why do you sleep? You sleep because your body needs it. Why do you work? You work so that you can sustain yourself.
Sure.
Then the question is, well, why are you here? Why are you alive? Why are you on this earth? And that's where everyone differs.
Sure.
So what is the purpose of life?
Oh man. So the purpose of life, according to Islam, is to worship Allah alone without partners. Just to put it very simply, right? But now again, it can convert into a nuanced question, right? It goes back to like, should there be a purpose to life? Before we even get to purpose of life, like I get with all deference to Khalid Yassin, but there's a lot of people that say, well, life doesn't need a purpose. So maybe we should just, do we even need a purpose? Like, should we have a purpose?
Or we create our own purpose. Like every one of us can just kind of create our own.
Right.
Like there has to be one, like, you know, we all have to do this. Like, I want to do what I want to do. Like that's good enough for me. Like I'm able to rationally come up with my own, you know, vision.
Do we even need a purpose?
Do we even need a purpose? Yeah. But today, I feel like the common thing today is like we can all individually decide what our purpose is.
Yeah, perhaps. Or we can say we don't. So then the new, you can say the new intellectual challenge that's coming up has a lot to do with this idea of there's no teleology, there's no purpose, right? Whether we're talking about history, whether we're talking about the human being. So for instance, you know, there's been a lot of talk related to things like human free will, right? Because if, you know, at the core, if we are just material beings that are you know, come together through a process that is blind, random, non-rational, and non-intentional, then the very neurons and things that are working within our brains that give us the illusion of free will, in fact, are just illusions, right? So therefore, forget purpose. We don't even have free will from that perspective, right? And so, you know, this, and obviously this has a number of repercussions when it comes to things like justice system, legal systems, you know, responsibility, accountability, and things like that. But, you know, if it comes down to, do we even have a purpose? I think that question precedes your question of what is the purpose, right? With a lot of young people, by the way. So do we need a purpose, Musab?
Oh man, I'm supposed to ask you the questions. No, but hold on.
So my style, man.
No, but see, okay, so if I can, so Firaz, myself, and Abdullah, we and you also, we deal with a lot of young people, right? We in various, whether it's in young Muslims or various groups, and like this is something that that young people, especially in this age of social media, it's like if any injustice, anything happens, they know immediately on their phone. Like I remember many years ago, we would hear about the things that were happening in various parts of the world, whether it's Kashmir or Palestine or anything. But when the Syria situation happened, we saw it on our phones.
Yeah,
we saw like what was happening, and so that really that kind of causes a lot of depression. And like amongst the youth, I noticed that there's a lot of depression. There was a lot of guys that were like, well, why is all this going on?
Anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety. It's like, this is a world we got to live in, right? And this is something that's going on right now. And so this was always an opportunity for me that, you know, to bring it back. Well, let's look at the systems that are around in the world today. Sure. You have systems in which this type of oppression is allowed to happen, you know, in which we are allowed to live comfortably over here, but our very own country is causing destruction on another part of the world. So that really, I feel like that a lot of times I saw young people say, okay, well, I have to figure out what's my purpose in life. Sure. And that kind of drove them towards Islam. And then that brings another situation where you want to make sure that they keep a level head and stay moderate and not lean one way or the other. So that's why we need a purpose, because we see what's going on. Purposeless lives, we see what that leads to. Right. Destruction.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's two kind of points of view when it comes to like, do we need a purpose? Yeah. One is at the one that you touched upon, which is a very core human essential element, right? Like, what does it all mean, right? And I think, you know, whatever, you know, intellectually, if let's say we can't come to a conclusion that we need a purpose, just every human understands that, right? And you know that famous example that I always put about the airplane, right? That if you got knocked out, like you're in the middle of a conversation, you get knocked out, and all of a sudden you wake up on an airplane, you're in first class, you know, the temperature's perfect, the seats are comfortable.
Nice.
You look out, and you know, it's a beautiful sunset, so it's pleasing to the eyes. The host comes and brings you like your favorite food. What's your favorite food, Musab?
Oh,
Biryani, of course.
Biryani.
like,
Okay.
yeah.
I can't stand biryani, by the way. But anyway,
No, as long as there's more meat than potatoes, then I'm
Allah
good.
Akbar.
Oh, I
Anyway,
love potatoes.
so he brings you, or she brings you biryani, whatever it is. It's the best biryani you ever had. Like, it melts in your mouth.
Must be PIA.
No, it's not. Yeah. I'm gonna get anyway, so you're on this plane. So the question then is, are you happy? Now, maybe you're happy with the seat. Maybe you're happy with the food. You know, the temperature, everything is great. But you were in the middle of a conversation on this webinar or whatever. You black out. You end up on this plane. You would have some questions, right? Just
Scary.
all right, which is, all right, well, how did I get here? Right? What am I doing here? And perhaps the most important question, where is this plane going, man? Like, who's flying the plane? Where is it going? Right? Those will be the core questions if you just blacked out and ended up on this plane. And you know, when we look at ourselves as human beings, there comes a certain point where you enter into a conscious reality, right? As a child, you might not experience it, but at a certain point, you end up on this like metaphoric plane of life. And so why would you not have the very same questions? Like, what am I doing here? Where is this plane going? And how did I get here? Right? So there's a core kind of human reality when we say like human beings are looking for a purpose, right? And I think the situation that we're in right now with the coronavirus and you know, in isolation and things like that, I think there's a lot of people that are asking those questions, right? Because now they actually have the opportunity to do so. They're not distracted by the biryani and the comfortable first class seats, right? Now they're thinking, wait a second, so where is this plane going, right? So yeah, so from one perspective, as a human being, we need to have those question answers like, okay, so what is our purpose and what does it all mean, right? Now, on the other hand, you know, and this is maybe something that Khalid Yassin spoke about, is that everything around us has a purpose, right? And we don't live our lives with the assumption that things don't have purposes, right? Very, very simple. In any field, you think about medicine, like every single aspect of medicine, every, medicine, every, organ, everything, you assume a purpose in order for you to get to where you're going, right? And so therefore, there's no reason why the human itself would not have a purpose. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's a human element, and then there's a teleological element. Okay, so what is the very purpose of this human construct that we have, right? And frankly, even before you get there, what is the human being itself, right? Is it just, just this material?
Matter.
Or is there something deeper? Like, what makes Mus'ab, right? If, God forbid, you got into a car accident, you lose an arm, you're still Mus'ab. You lose your other arm, you're still Mus'ab. You lose your legs, God forbid, you're still. So what makes you, you? There's a certain conscious reality by which you are you. And so, that's something that you have to ask. What is the purpose of that being, that ontological being that you are?
I see what you did there. Did you see what you did? Was that on purpose, the Mus'ab and arms cut off?
No. Why? Did you, something I should know about?
Yeah, Mus'ab ibn Umair. What happened?
Not live? Okay, you can talk.
No, I'm saying Mus'ab ibn Umair. Isn't that how he died in battle?
I was thinking that.
Okay, so what was the purpose of that statement?
Yeah. That's good, man. I like that. It's really humble.
Oh, man. Okay. I did have another question for you. I have a question for you. So you started this, you started by saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And from my understanding, you said in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. Well, if God is so compassionate, then why does he allow suffering? Why have hundreds of thousands of people dying right now from this pandemic? Like, why?
Sure.
Why does God allow suffering?
So, the interesting thing is, so we do this program where we invite some of our, let's say, Christian brothers and sisters and discuss this very question. And what's really interesting is that when we discuss this question, they run into a lot of problems, all right? And the Islamic framework doesn't. And it's not, and the thing is, it's not, this question isn't presented as a debate, which is the beauty of the question itself. It's presented just as a real human question, like why does God allow suffering, right? Now, why is it that from the Christian perspective, they have a lot of trouble with it? The reason is because once you detach your first question about purpose from this question itself, you can't really answer this question. In other words, if you haven't figured out what your purpose is, then the very idea of there being certain wisdoms to your suffering makes no sense whatsoever, right? So it goes back. What is the purpose? Well, our purpose is to worship Allah, right? That when we die, we'll be judged by our actions, right? And there'll be a day of judgment. If those things are very clear, then we can say anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts us through is a perceived evil by you, but it all ties back to his wisdom, right? He's Al-Hakim, okay? Typically, the logical form of this argument is that, okay, God is three superlative attributes, that he's all-knowing, he's all-powerful, and all-knowing, all-powerful, and he is all good, right? And so therefore, if he's all good, he wouldn't want evil. If he's all powerful, he could stop it. And if he's all knowing, he would know about it. The issue with this is that, number one, there's an abstraction of only three attributes of Allah. Whereas from the Islamic framework, we say Allah has many names and attributes, right? One of them being Al-Hakim, that he's wise. And therefore, just because someone doesn't know the wisdom of some sort of evil that's happening or perceived evil in their eyes doesn't mean that there isn't one, right? So the real question is there a being who transcends the human being, who is perfect, that created all of us and is wise, and his attribute of wise is maximally perfect? That is really what the discussion should be. Before you get to, well, hold on a second, you're basically, like you've got this kind of construct where you're stuck because either he's this or this or this. Now, what's interesting is that most people, or many people, the logical form of the argument isn't a problem, because you could say, well, there are wisdoms that God has, and therefore, it could be something that you just don't know about. But now let me ask you, I'll ask this to Faraz. So if you were to present this to someone, what do you think their complaint would be? Like if you said, look, God has wisdoms behind, your mother having cancer, so that's just it, man. Well, what do you think the reaction would be if you told someone that?
Probably get punched in the face.
Okay, well, why? Why would you get punched in the face? Like, it's not logical.
Well, I think people find comfort in understanding things that they can feel and they can see.
Right. So that's the thing, is that the logical form is not a problem, because you could easily say, well, there's certain wisdoms. Allah knows, you don't. Allah is all-knowing. Your knowledge is limited, right? But now, when someone that's in the midst of the situation, if all you go to them with is this, or some sort of logical form, right? That is not going to, usually it's not going to be enough. That's why you get punched in the face, right? So one of the beautiful things about Islam is that while we don't know all of the wisdoms, but we have a plethora of wisdoms that the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran expound upon, right? So you could start counting them down. And when I do these programs with Christians, I never get to the end of the list. Meaning, look, you can have this wisdom, this wisdom, this wisdom. So to give you an example, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would put you in a situation to bring you back to his worship, because that is the very core of your life. That's what you should be doing, right? Because why? Because he wants you to get to paradise, right? So I'll give you an example. A couple back in 2008, when this whole economic crash happened, I remember there was an imam, and he was talking about this guy. He was living in Silicon Valley. So this fundraiser was in LA or somewhere in California. And this imam said that this guy, he lost everything. Like, he was one of these Silicon Valley guys that had like all the money you could possibly think of. Kids were in private school. He lost it all. So he had to sell his house, take his kids out of private school. And as he was driving away from his house, he said, let me just stop by the masjid, right? The imam says he went to the masjid, he put his head on the ground and just started bawling, right? And, he had this enormous amount of just love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and just, that Allah, like, in a sense, like, broke him in order to bring him back to Allah. And so he told this imam, he said, Wallahi, Shaykh, if I could get all of that money back and I would have to trade it for that one moment of sincerity that I had to Allah, I would not trade it. Right?
Wow.
So what I'm trying to say is, and that's one wisdom, right? There are like many when you think about it, but you have to, what we have to understand, they have to be attached to our very meaning and purpose in life. If you detach it from that, then yeah, none of this makes sense, right? But once you attach it to something that says, okay, hold on, this life is temporary, right? Another interesting aspect within the Christian framework, this world is good, right? Right? God so loved the world. So God loves the world in the Christian framework. Is that true within the Islamic framework? What do you guys think?
No.
No, right? Obviously, the word dunya itself, it comes from adna, something that's low, right? And in fact, you know that from the various hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about the value of the dunya. In terms of, we have this direct opposite, approach. This dunya is a temporary place, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say He loves the world. In fact, by the word dunya itself, there's hayat al-dunya, like a lowly life. And by kind of juxtaposing that, if there's hayat al-dunya, there's hayat al-ulya, there's a better, higher life. And that goes back to this idea of purpose. Your purpose has to be attached to something that transcends this life anyway, right? So if you're going through some sort of issues in this life, but you have no reason to go through them, then it makes no sense. But if it's attached to the akhirah, now you're able to now expound upon some of those wisdoms, and they make sense, right? And you're able to deal with things, death in the family, for instance. I remember when my father-in-law passed away, and my wife, she said to me, she said, this would be extremely difficult for me had I not been Muslim, had I not understood, because, may Allah have mercy upon him. He was a really good guy. He used to make the adhan, all the time. He was very jolly. And he was a really gem of a person. And he died on the day of Friday in a state of wudu on his way to Jummah. All these things in our tradition that we know are signs of a good end. And so when you start thinking about that, this person died in the state, you have a type of solace. Whereas if you're detached from any idea of Allah or the akhirah, where are you going to get that solace, right? If your worldview is everything just happened through processes that are random, non-rational, non-intentional, and it's all just stuff, well, yeah, then it makes no sense. You go to a funeral, and what are you going to tell the person? Yeah, I'm sorry, your son who died went from one material state to another material state. Bummer. I mean, what are you going to tell the person, right? So it has to be attached to our purpose and meaning. And once you attach it to that, you find that the Islamic tradition is replete with reasons. We don't say we know all the wisdoms, but man, when you start looking through it, it'll blow your mind, right? About how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly is.
And so when we look at these things, you talked about how, that one brother in the Silicon Valley, he wouldn't trade all of his money for that one moment of sincerity. Yeah. It's, at times like this that kind of cement the faith into somebody.
Yeah.
And so for us, like sometimes we see miracles, or sometimes we see things that happen. Like I was in a car accident a few years ago, 2012. And I remember my parents telling me one thing was that once, we got out of the car and everything, the only thing that survived from the car was our mushaf, our Quran.
Wow.
And we were like, oh, subhanAllah, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting you, things like that we typically say. Right. Now, in someone from another faith, right? Let's say, you have someone in the Christian faith or someone in the Jewish faith, and let's say they're listening to scripture on the radio, they get into a car accident and they survive. Sure. And they say that, oh, it was because I was listening to this that, I am cemented in my faith now.
Sure.
How do you differentiate between which religion is right when they say that, oh, I experienced a miracle and now my faith is stronger?
Well, remember, so the example that I gave about the gentleman was that he's in a position of evil, right? Whereas a mushaf surviving or not, I mean, with all respect, I mean, maybe,
right? No, I understand that completely. I understand that completely.
Like, that wouldn't be my first dawah tool to come up with and say, like, look, the mushaf survived.
Like if I had a milk bottle in the car and the milk bottle survived, I'm not going to say, oh, like it's the milk.
Right. I mean, so I think that, again, what the issue is that if we're going to be relying on things like this, like a Bible surviving and a Quran surviving, then yeah, you're going to be stuck, right? But what we're talking about, again, is a situation where you actually suffer, right? How do you explain that suffering, right? What is the wisdom behind it? Christianity doesn't have anything, man. I mean, look, some of their main large, like big-time philosophers, Alvin Plantinga, he's a big-time philosopher in Christianity. The best he can come up with is what's known as a free will defense, right? And what is the free will defense? Well, if there wasn't evil in the world, then you wouldn't have a true free choice. If the choices were all good, and all you could choose was good, then you really don't have free will, right? And obviously, the issue is though, those choices that are going to be made have to be moral choices. Like having a choice between, you know, cornflakes and Wheaties is not really well, maybe for some of you it's a moral choice, but anyways, but I mean, it's not necessarily a moral choice. But the problem then arises if it's based on moral choices, even with the free will defense. What is the value of a moral choice if Jesus came, died for your sins, and you're already good to go? Again, you're stuck, right? Like, why does it matter? Whereas from the Islamic framework, your moral choices matter. So if that's being used as a defense, you know, when someone brought that up at one of these conversations, I said, that's a wonderful defense for Muslims. I said, but for the Christian, I mean, you're kind of stuck, man. Because what's the value of a moral choice if at the end you're still going to paradise? You know what I mean? So again, it has to be tied to meaning and purpose, and the fact that we'll be judged for our deeds, right? And that once that's made clear, then you can now say, okay, well, you know, like the presence of evil or suffering in this world, it has certain wisdoms that Islam can expound upon, right? That is replete with. So I don't know if that answers what. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it does it does answer it. So would you say that Islam has a lot to do with blind faith?
No, I mean, I think so. I think the term blind faith is interesting, right? Because what do we mean by blind faith? Are you saying that you can basically anything that you believe you have to provide proof? Is that what we're saying?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
In other words, anything that you're not going to believe anything until you can prove it. Is that what we mean when we say blind faith?
Well, wouldn't blind faith be the opposite of that? Believing into something even if proof doesn't exist?
Right. So I'm saying you're not going to move forward unless you have the opposite.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay. But that leads to a very interesting problem though, right? And here's what the problem is. If you say, I'm not going to believe anything unless you can prove it to me, right? There are a multitude of things that you believe that you cannot prove, okay? And in philosophy, they call these axioms or basic beliefs, right? The point is that it's not that they're illogical, but they're kind of outside of your rationale, and therefore they're improved. You cannot prove them, but you need them in order for yourself to move forward, okay? To give you a very simple example, let's say I tell you I'm a married bachelor, all right? How does that sound to you? Does that sound good? Can I be a married bachelor?
You're going on to your second wife?
Yeah, dude, come on, man. Why do Muslims do that? Still illogical. Even if I had 4 wives, right? Or 3 wives, and I've still got a slot or whatever it might be. Still cannot. You still, by the first wife that I have, right? By the way, I only have 1. But anyways, the second I get married, I cease being a bachelor, right?
Right.
Well, I cannot be a married bachelor. But what if I insist upon it? I said, no, I can be.
It's an oxymoron.
It's an oxymoron. I mean, you can't.
Something cannot be its opposite. Cannot be.
The point is, what if I'm insistent upon it? I say, no, I believe you can. Prove to me that you cannot be a bachelor and married at the same time.
Then the conversation is over.
Well, why is the conversation over?
Because we have to have certain things that we agree to have the basics of a conversation, or the basics to approve and disprove anything.
So what's the thing here that needs to be agreed upon?
That like something cannot be its opposite, or like opposites are, you can't mutually.
You cannot have mutually exclusive things. I cannot be Fahad and not be Fahad at the same time, right? You cannot have a square circle. But
you can't be God and human at the same time.
Right. That is a logical principle, though. So you cannot prove the principle. You have to start with the principle, right? That's the assumption. Now, what's really interesting is that those logical principles are things that are outside of rationality. If you didn't have them, rationality wouldn't work. So there are certain things that you cannot prove, but you must start off with in order for your entire rational framework to even work, right? And there's lots of things like that. A concept like aesthetic tastes. Those are not things that you're going to prove, right? You don't see a sunset and you're like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. And, your friend comes up and he's like, well, rationally prove to me that that's beautiful. It's not part of the conversation, right? It's something that lies outside of rationality, okay? So your initial question was, do we rely on blind faith? Well, the point is, what do we mean by blind faith, right? Because there are certain things that you, by necessity, have to have in order for your worldview to even work, right? Because if you say, look, I'm not going to believe something until you prove it, right? What you're saying is, I'm only going to rely on rationality. The problem is that if you try to rationalize everything, you're basically saying, okay, well, I doubt it. That's why I'm asking about it. Okay. But can you ask why infinitely? Because there's no theorem that is infinitely defendable. You can't say because forever. Okay. I'll give you an example that I usually give. I say, imagine my son, he comes and he pulls a knife out in the kitchen, and I say, hey, you got to put that back. He's like, why? I'm like, well, because it's sharp. He says, why? I said, well, because it's sharp because it's meant to cut things. He says, why? I'm like, well, because you can cut fruit, and so on. And then he keeps on asking why. At a certain point, I'm like, because I said so, right? It has nothing to do with, how far are you going to keep going? So in reality, when you're saying, I'm going to keep on asking why, and I can do that, I'm only going to rely on rationality, and I need proof for everything, you're saying I doubt everything. But if you doubt everything, you have to doubt your doubt, which leaves you intellectually paralyzed. You can't go anywhere. Right?
Man.
So therefore, there have to be things, like, look at it this way. When we say that we believe in Allah and Allah is as-samad, right? The absolute. The term absolute, it comes from absolute, that which is not soluble, right? Like, imagine someone comes, they say, have the perfect solvent. It will dissolve anything. You still you have to ask the person, what bottle are you going to keep that in? All right? So the rationale, it's a great solvent, but you still need a bottle to keep it in, right? And that's where the idea, when it comes to a starting point and a worldview, comes in. So the issue was, in our worldview, we've been accustomed to say, okay, blind faith, everything needs proof. The reality is that the very construct by which we're moving forward by saying, is it just blind faith? We have to question the question itself, right? Is that even a valid question? Because there's a lot of things that you, from a person's definition, may say that are just blind faith, but nothing works if you don't have that quote unquote blind faith.
And so the reason I asked that question was because I wanted to kind of segue into another question. Was
that in the wrong direction? My bad.
No. You actually, it kind of answered the question a little bit, but maybe you can touch a little bit more on this next question. Why did God create us just to worship him? Isn't that just selfish?
So again, talking about worldview, selfish is a very human attribute. Like when you say someone's selfish, like what does that even mean, right? They're preferring themselves over others, right? That's what we mean by selfish, okay? There may be a certain degree of arrogance, like they're thinking they're better than everyone else, right? And so on. When you're talking about Allah, can you have those same ideas when it comes to Allah, right? If we say that Allah is the absolute and that he is unique and he is one, okay? Who are you going to compare Allah to say he's selfish or to say he's arrogant? To what, right? There's nothing to, so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he is the al-mutakabbir, right? That he is the greatest, Allahu Akbar, well, that is not a question of some sort of like a moral issue with Allah. That's just a reality, right? So it's like, for instance, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, huwa al-awwalu wal-akhir, that he is the first and the last, okay? That only works if there is one God, right? One Allah, right? Because if you think about a race, you've got a multitude of people, they're running the race, and somebody comes in first, someone comes second, and someone's first, someone's last. If there's one person running the race, that person is first and last. So the only way you can be first and last is if you're one. So there are certain things that we can't apply to Allah, not because of some sort of moral issue with Allah, but because of the very fact that who Allah is, that he's one, right? And so therefore, to ask the question, it doesn't really make sense, because how can the one creator be arrogant when there's nothing to compare that arrogance to? Because then you would have to necessarily say that there's something greater than Allah, right? Now that becomes a theological issue, not really a moral issue per se. Does that make sense? You know what I'm
that
saying?
makes perfect sense.
I wanted to kind of go back to, not that I'm not enjoying this existential headache from all the thinking that you're provoking, but I had a question that, I was talking to Faraz about this, and I've discussed this with Abdullah a number of times, that there's so much anti-Islamic propaganda. And when we think Islamophobia, a lot of times we think, skinheads or like uneducated people, but there are very educated, intellectual people who are dedicated their lives and literally billions of dollars to attacking the Muslim world, to questioning our faith, to making Muslim kids and Muslim youth doubt their faith. Why is there such animosity? It's like, what are they afraid of? What is it that why are they so aggressive and so focused on this anti-Islamic agenda?
Right. So, I mean, this isn't really a new problem, right? I mean, even from the very get-go, when the Prophet ﷺ came, I mean, what was he really calling people towards, right? In essence, he's calling people to worship Allah alone. He's calling people to, uphold the rights of kin, give the rights of the poor and the impoverished and the orphans and things like that. Why such animosity? Well, from the very get-go, I think there's a certain section of people that understand what it means if Islam now becomes predominant, right? And that is very scary, okay? Now that's a certain section of people. And so in order to do away with that, they spend a lot of money and a lot of effort because, what are some of the key elements of Islam? So a lot of people have this idea that the reason why the mushrikeen, the Quraysh specifically, were against the Prophet ﷺ was only based on the fact that he came to say that Allah is one and not and there's nothing that can intercede, right? In the sense of these other gods and things like that. But in fact, when you really start studying the Sira, you find there were other motivations too. One of those motivations was economic, right? Now, if let's say if you do away with something like interest-bearing transactions in that system, well, that's a lot of business that's going to be removed, right?
Yeah.
Even before you even get to interest, that came later as well. Even if people are not going to be coming and worshiping the idols in Mecca, you're going to be losing a lot of money, right? And so you've got to do something to make sure you're preserving your financial well-being, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's like the conversation nowadays with the coronavirus and how some people are like, well, the economy, right? We have to focus on that. Even if people die, it's all good, but we don't want to sacrifice the economy, right?
Yeah.
Which, it almost seems insane. So one of those motivations, I think, has to do with the idea of, that they understand what are the ramifications of Islam being predominant, right? In terms of morally, ethically, sociologically, economically. On the other hand, I think the general mass of people, they have this, they're influenced a lot by everything that's surrounding them. Okay, whether that's the media, right, which has its own kind of motivations, whether it's the church they go to and the pastor every Sunday saying just stay away from them, that's the religion of the devil, whatever it might be. And so for people to not be sheepish, right, not follow the crowd, it's extremely difficult, right?
Yeah.
And so some people, it has nothing to do with the predominance of Islam or anything like that. It really just has to do with the context and the society that they're living in has completely vilified Islam, right? And so for people like that, I think the onus is more upon us to present Islam to them, right? That's more of a failing on our part than just casting blame on the media, right?
It's 5:59 now, and as much as I wish that we could continue this discussion for much longer, I know that Brother Fahad has a reading list, probably some more programs, and a family to get back to.
True.
I want to thank you for sharing your hour and some change with us. This was actually this was kind of I don't want to say a philosophical, but this was a discussion where we talked about the crux of the issue and try to get people to think. And the next, like Faraz said in the beginning, that we have a Sunday series and a Saturday series. The next 4 Saturdays, we're going to have Taking Islam to the Streets with Imam Qasim Khan, the Imam of the Masjid in the 5th Ward. Islam and Hip Hop. Hate put me in prison. Islam broke me out. In fact, Faraz, do you have the flyer? Could you share that on the main screen right now?
You want the main one or all of them?
The one with even the Sunday programs. And then finally, on week 5, the Saturday, Puerto Rican Imam tells it how it is. I feel like what the things that Brother Fahad was saying I feel like the next 4 Saturdays, what we're gonna hear from those brothers is everything that he said in action. Those brothers, none of the brothers who are going to be speaking next 4 weeks were born into Islam. They went through that line of reasoning and questions and then arrived at their conclusion, and they're going to share some great insight with us. But on Sundays, the sisters have put together some excellent programs. Tomorrow, the guest speaker will be Tayyib Yunus, Brother Tayyib Yunus, the first national coordinator of Young Muslims. And his topic is Beyond My Degree is My Career, All I Should Ask For. In addition, they have Living Islam Liberally, Vices of the Mind with Chaplain Gareth Bryant, Living in a Hypersexualized Society, and then finally the Muslim Activist, Proactive or Inactive. It's every Saturday and Sunday, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Central Time, right here. And Faraz, if you could post that flyer so anyone can see who has not seen.
Yeah, I've just posted it. It's USIA. I'll go ahead and screen share it as well so everyone can see it.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate what Musab said, we really appreciate your time, Imam Fahad. And, we appreciate you taking the hour out to answer all our questions.
No, it's my pleasure. Always good.
Abdullah, do you want to say concluding remarks and concluding dua, and then we'll close out, inshallah.
I'll leave the dua for Sheikh Fahad. I think he'll do a much better job. But concluding comment, I would like to advise, I assume that the average audience is like probably teens and 20s, relatively young audience, right? Maybe even younger, preteens. I want to tell them that that they have one life, right? They have one life to live. Life is short. We can die any moment. And even though you're young, recognize that the society we're in is going to teach you a lot of things that are nonsense, right? They're going to tell you that you're going to live forever, that it's just about happiness. But Sheikh Fahad just shared with us a few of the many reasons why believing in Allah and worshiping Allah is your purpose in life. Happiness sounds good, yes, but happiness doesn't last forever. We want happiness forever in Jannah, but on this planet, our goal is to worship Allah and to call people to the worship of Allah. So if you've heard something that was good and beneficial, which you have, see if you can share with your friends, your classmates, your co-workers, your neighbors, your family members, and so Allah can reward us all. Jazakumullah khair.
All right, well, Jazakumullah khair, all of you guys. It was really fun, engaging. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you, bless your families. And accept from all of us and keep us all here. And may He make our best day the day whose length is 50,000 years, which is the day of judgment. So I'll conclude there. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Hey Musab, just one quick question. Someone is asking, are the Sunday session sisters only, or is it sisters and brothers?
No, all the sessions are open to everybody. All the sessions are open to everybody, inshallah. Yeah, so I guess you can just leave the flyer up, and I guess we'll see everybody tomorrow at 5 p.m., inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.